fascinating book, Gems and Jewels, The Religions of Pakistan. Before we get going, I would like to give a little information. This talk forms, this talk is part of our arts and culture lecture series, which we have been regularly organizing since 2017. And the series is organized by the Yunus Emre Institute, as well as the organizer of this event. Established in 2007, the organization has over 60 branches all over the world, and it aims to increase the awareness on Turkish culture, encourage learning of Turkish language, and also stimulate the greater exchange in the fields of arts, culture, science. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Amineh Hoti. She is associated with the University of Cambridge, where she also obtained her PhD. She is also a graduate of LSE. And at the moment, she's an honorary professor at the University of Nottingham. We are very excited to have your talk on your fascinating book. You have the floor.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much, dear sister Shehrabano, for your hospitality and for welcoming me. Dr. Mehmet, thank you for your hospitality, for your platform. Really appreciate the Yunus Emre Center. I know that there was a series on Netflix during COVID, so I think that was the best use of time to watch useful series like that. And really the figure of Yunus Emre really inspires us. So thank you for setting up the center and for having this platform here. Appreciate it, especially in the Western context. Thank you. And thank you all for being here. Some very dear friends are here. My friend Alif, my friend Ling Ling, Raja Uncle, Moeen, Arsala, Victoria, Ling Ling, Adam, Anna, so many wonderful people here. Really appreciate. Thank you all. And I hope to get to know some of you who are here and I haven't met, so that we can continue our discussion and get to know each other. So this was a book called Gems and Jewels, which was published last year in 2021. There are only a few copies of this. So if you get a copy, you're lucky. What we're doing is we're donating the money that you give to a center called Markaz-e-Ilm. So it'll be really towards planting trees in the center, which is for interfaith dialogue and peace. Now, I want to ask you all that what you think is the image of Pakistan. When I say the word Pakistan, what comes to your mind? Sorry? Mangoes. Oh, yes. Good image. Sorry? If you could raise your hand and Benazir Bhutto, okay. What are the other images? What are the popular images that come to your mind? Yes. Cricket, yes. Are the richest and the poorest? Absolutely. Yes, Kashmir. Imran Khan, yes. 2 votes for Imran Khan here. 3 votes. Oh, this is not a political talk. Pause here. Any other thoughts that come to you which are maybe in terms of image, the image of Pakistan? Extremist, yes. Pakistan, so pure land, yes. Any others? So often the image of Pakistan is one of a monolith, that, you know, it's just one country predominantly with Muslim majority people with a certain type of view, which is very black and white, the image. And so you get this perspective, which is, you see a lot in television, sometimes in literature. What I did in my PhD thesis was really looking at northern Pakistan. And what I did was, in some of the work that I did in my field, that is social anthropology, people who were founding fathers of my subject called social anthropology were using words like savages to describe native people. So for me, as a young student studying at LSE at the University of Cambridge later, I said, hey, hold on here, because are these people really savages? You know, even though they weren't directly describing my culture, but the word was used in my subject. And I knew the people, I had relatives, I had friends, and they were very warm, wonderful people. So they were definitely did not fit into this description. And I said, once I'm at university or post-university, I would love to explore a little more depth, go under the skin and find out what really is there in terms of the diversity of Pakistan. So really looking at Pakistanis in terms of giving a sense of respect and voice to the diverse people, whether they're women or men or people of different faiths and ethnicities. And that's what I did in my book called Sorrow and Joy Among Muslim Women, which was published by Cambridge University Press. And because the perspective was so new, all three publishers, Cambridge University Press, Oxford, and Routledge's, wanted to publish this one book. So I was really lucky on my first publication, but I gave it to Cambridge. And so because it was really challenging what was the mainstream perspective. So really looking at a sense of respect for indigenous people. So what was important for me in this book, much later on, because it was sponsored by a member of the minorities in Gems and Jewels. It was sponsored by Isfanyar Bhandara, who's from the Parsi community in Pakistan, and he wanted a book on diversity and different religious communities. So he said, should I sponsor a book on cars or on religions? And I said on religions, of course, because it's such an interesting topic. And a lot of people said it's really sensitive, so don't talk about religion. But for me, as a social anthropologist, I loved to go across Pakistan from Swat, Chitral, and down to Karachi and explore Pakistan through fieldwork, through interviews, through research, through meeting people, but also through reading wonderful sources of books, such as Shah Abdul Latif Bhitai's book called the Shah Jo Risalo. And that is a gem of a book. If any of you have not read it, please make a note of it and please get a hold of it, because the philosophy is like Yunus Emre's work. It's all Sufi saints. So Waris Shah, there's another book called Waris Shah, author called Waris Shah, and he has written Heer Ranja, which some of you may be familiar with. But all these stories are really about divine love. So these are not superficial stories of Romeo and Juliet, but Shakespeare apparently was inspired by these stories. So this gave me another or an alternative picture of Muslim society when I was working in the field. So we weren't seeing, this monolith, but suddenly I came across this stunning diversity. Up in the north, we'll see Kalasha in the next few slides, who have their own unique ethnic group, and they're believed to be descendants of Alexander the Great. Then we have Parsis, we have Hindus, we have Christians, we have a whole variety of Muslims. So we're going to see a little bit of that. But that diversity for me was stunning. There was not just diversity on a general scale, but within each religion, there was diversity. So I couldn't say, oh, a Muslim is equal to this, as the media often portrays to us, which paints a very black and white picture, unfortunately. But as a scholar, as someone who is working in the field, we see all these fantastic voices, and our job as scholars, as social anthropologists, as social scientists, is to bring out those voices, and within their own voices and their own stories, tell what their picture is about to the world. So that's what this book is doing. So if we go back to Pakistan, Pakistan is historically, it's very rich in its ancient civilizations and dynasties. If you look back, you have some fantastic civilizations, starting with the Mehergarh civilization, which is one of the oldest civilizations in world history. It's almost 9,000 BC. So when you talk about ancient Egyptian, this is far more deeper than those civilizations, which is part of our world history. So it's part of our heritage. It doesn't only belong to Pakistan. I would say these gems are, everybody should own them and say, this is, you know, my heritage, my history, and how do we learn so we don't feel threatened by anybody else's history, but we learn and we appreciate the diversity. So we talked about the subject, this book, which really reflected women's perspectives in a segregated society. So I really found that there were so many inclusive ideas in Pakistan. And I was really looking and discovering some of these faiths, and through meeting them, really finding that some of the founding fathers, like, for example, Baba Guru Nanak, who's the founding father of the Sikh religion, or Sedhu Baba in Swat, who's another very inclusive and embracing saint, or Mia Mir in Lahore, or Bhit Shah in Sindh, or Waris Shah in the Punjab, or Data Sahib, Data Ganj Bakhsh in Lahore. All of their philosophy was about reaching out, inclusion, about embracing the other. So I have here a few written quotes from Data Sahib, which I would like to read for you. So his name is Sheikh Sayyid Ali ibn bin Uthman al-Hujweri, or he's called more commonly as Data Sahib, and his burial place is in Lahore, and many people come to visit his burial place. So he's an 11th century Muslim mystic. So Data Sahib was originally from Afghanistan, but he traveled for 40 years to acquire knowledge, including to Syria, Iraq, Iran, Azerbaijan, and so many other places. After meeting many wise men and sages, he called them the luminaries of love. So his book is called the Kashaf al-Mahjub, which is the unveiling of the veiled. And it's one of the oldest treatises, the oldest books in mystical Islam, with details about its practice and the saints who are gems in the path towards God. So it talks about spiritual elevation. The Kashf al-Mahjub shows, in the Kashf al-Mahjub, Data Sahib shows, and he talks about Islamic sciences such as tafsir of the Quran, the Hadith, the fiqh, Muslim law, and dogmatic theology, which is Ilmul Kalam. Data Sahib in the Kashf al-Mahjub talks about the importance of worship, pure intentions, overcoming selfishness, poverty, and simplicity. His book explores the knowledge of the saints, the friends of God, which is true wealth, and the lessons to be learned from their stories and struggles. He says, you should know, may God give you strength, that I find this universe the treasure house of divine secrets, and created things as expressions of subtleties of creation. So Data Sahib was really inspired by scholars like Ibn al-Arabi. He says, this is one of his quotes, that creation is the expression or outcome of God's power of creation. Creation cannot be separated from the creator. And he really talks about the spiritual journey of humankind, which is, again, the pains and the tribulations of the spiritual journey are a test So he really calls them an imtihan, or he calls the sense of bala. Bala is the difficulties in the path of life. He says that only the friends of God, or people who are close to God, the awliya, are afflicted by bala. And he says, the more they are afflicted, the greater and higher is the degree of their nearness to God. It is said, bala is the ornament of awliya and cradle of the saints and the nourishment of the prophets. That's a beautiful sentence. It's on page 284 of the book. So please do have a look. Then he says over here, the goals of mystical Islam and science are the same, as both search for knowledge of the universe and the proper use of that knowledge. But without God at the center of that universe, for the mystics, you disprove the whole universe, including yourself. But with knowledge of God, he says, it's important to include the concept of love, which is inclusive. So Data Sahib says, Sufism is the name of courtesy. So the person who is the most courteous is the greatest Sufi. Indeed, crudeness is described as repulsive to refined nature, as an ugly verse is to a good poet. Now I'm going to read that once again because it's such a lovely line. He says, crudeness is described as repulsive to refined nature, as an ugly verse is to a good poet. So Data Sahib says the seeker and believer cannot be rich without God, without love. So you need that sense of divine love and seeking God. So this is a little glimpse of Data Sahib. He goes on, they're beautiful quotes, and the whole journey is to oppose the nafs, according to Data Sahib, which is the sense of ego, the sense of one's pride or one's human lui or bigness. The book is set, the structure of the book is set in a form which respects the sense of Sufi adab. So there's a very strong concept in South Asia of respecting the other. And therefore the communities that are smallest in number are set right in the beginning of the book. And the community that's largest in number is put right at the end of the book. So the community that is smallest in number are Jains, and so they come first. It's like a concept of pehle aap, which my friend Lubna and brother Irfan here would be familiar with. So we have Islam right at the end because you have the majority religion right at the end, and it has the biggest chunk. So there's a lot of rich material, and I would ask you to have a look into that. Now, this is a little quote from Prince Hassan, and I would like you all to read it or maybe glance at the book. It's also at the back of the book, but he's also written a foreword to the book. So diversity is something that's really celebrated in the Quran, and I know there's a beautiful verse of Yunus Emre coming here. We heard some wonderful verses, which he talks about diversity and inclusion, etc. And this beautiful verse says here, to each of you, which I'm sure you all are familiar with, it says, to each of you we gave a law and a pattern of life. If God had pleased, he could surely have made you one people, professing the same faith, but he wished to try and test you by that which he has given each of you. So race to all that is good. And this is a stunning verse because it really celebrates the sense of diversity and the sense of richness and the sense of celebrating otherness. So I don't have to be the same as someone else to appreciate them, but sometimes that difference can challenge my own sense of self. So why do we use the concept of gems and jewels? It's an old tradition in South Asia to use the words gems, jewels, gold, rubies, pearls to describe the awliya, to describe the khalifas, to describe Rasulullah. There are many quotes, as you see behind me. The Quran itself uses the words corals and rubies for purified souls. in Surat Rahman. And they're beautiful. Yunus Emre, the great Turkish poet who I mentioned many times, says that the Quran is a jewel's sea. And if you see Goethe's poem, he also talks about the Prophet and his smile being like pearls. So you see many references to the use of the word gems and jewels. And gems and jewels, it's a metaphor, really, to describe people whose souls are purified on a difficult journey of life. The concept that Data Saab described as bala. So you see them walking towards the path, the Sirat al-Mustaqim, which is referred to again and again in all the stories. And maybe if we have a little bit of time, we can talk about Shah Abdul Latif Bhitai's book and his beautiful stories. So you see behind me the Badshahi Mosque, which is a gorgeous, beautiful mosque, very historical in Pakistan, and it was built by the great Mughals, who also promoted the concept of dialogue, of interfaith dialogue, of inclusiveness, of respecting the other, etc. So this is one of the prides of Pakistan. And these are quotes from the book. Each faith is given its own chapter. And so each faith has beautiful, inclusive quotes, really focusing on compassion. Now, if some of you want to volunteer to read these out, or do you want me to read them out, or you want to read them out yourself? What would you prefer? Sorry? You want me to read them out? Okay. So this says, for Jains, it says, the function of souls is to help one another. And that's a beautiful concept, especially in today's world. The Zoroastrian faith says, happiness unto him who gives happiness unto others, which I find stunning as well. The Kalasha in the north say we are one of the oldest religions in the world, but there has been no murder and no theft in our history. The Jews say of Pakistan, Kadosh, 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 Yahweh Elohim, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The Buddhists say, I wish that all living beings should be happy and free from suffering, which is beautiful again. Baha'is say oneness of humankind, unity in diversity. And they believe in about 9 faith communities and are inclusive of all 9 and others. Sikhs say, first, Allah created light, then by his creative power, he made all mortal beings. From the one light, the entire universe welled up. So who is good and who is bad? All are blessings of the one creator. The Christians love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. Now that's not just a literal sentence, but it's got so much depth in terms of neighborhood and countries and people, and neighbor could be anyone different to you, or anyone irritating you, or their concept irritating you. But this really helps us to break those barriers of the other. The Hindus say, God, lead us from darkness of ignorance to the light of spiritual knowledge. God, let there be peace, peace, peace. And that's such a beautiful concept again, because especially with today, in today's concept, we have to remind ourselves again and again that our textbooks talk about peace, and yet on the ground or in reality, our hopes or our emotions come in the way and make us so angry that we are willing to kill or even commit genocide, which is awful. So we need to remind ourselves again and again about the texts. Muslims, in the name of the beloved, the Lord of mercy, the giver of mercy, and of his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the diversity of your languages and your colors. Indeed, in that are signs for those of knowledge. And that's again beautiful because it emphasizes on the concept of knowledge, on learning, on ilm. And that's what all the faiths are about. It's about reaching out and helping humankind. So as I said, all the faiths have this concept of inclusiveness and the idea of working for the common good. And some of the examples that I came across, which you'll find in the book, one example is of two sisters. They're called Rati and Peran, and they're from the Parsi community. And so one sister, because of partition of India and Pakistan, was left in India with her property in Bombay. And one of the sisters was now based in Lahore. And she is a very famous lady. She's an elderly lady. Rati sadly passed away after I interviewed her, but Peran is alive. And she teaches, she's been teaching generations of Pakistani girls in Lahore at Kanade College. And one of the main theaters is named after her because she teaches Bernard Shaw and English literature and, you know, wonderful stuff. So she's really inspiring people. But their story is so moving because these two sisters cannot meet just simply because there is a line between the two countries and because there's so much hostility between the two different nations. So that's something to, you know, hate always produces these boundaries and walls, whereas the sense of respect, mutual respect, even for your neighbor, helps you to build bridges. So that's something that is a really important point. And then we see many examples, for example, Buddha's practices, or even the idea that the teacher is the highest jewel. So just simply think of that, because I know that Pakistan is also home to the Gandhara civilization, which is one of the oldest civilizations in knowledge. And it had one of the oldest universities in Pakistan. And the simple concept of teaching was fund in itself. The teacher didn't want a pay or a salary. All they wanted was the prize was in the teaching. So these concepts are very beautiful concepts, which I really learned, and you know, it was very inspiring for me. Now I'm going to share a few images with you. These are the Kalasha up in the north, and they are said to be descendants of Alexander the Great. And they have their story in the book, so you'll hear their voices, their perspectives, and sometimes they're offended if we call them kafir, or, you know, that you're not part of our community. They feel othered. And they say, hey, no, that's not my picture. That's not, I reject that. So that's quite interesting too. And here you see the royal visit of Prince William and Kate to the north to see the Kalasha. These are some of their festivals. And they have these beautiful dresses. This is Parsi. And do you notice something very interesting? Because Parsi is, Toxi is a Parsi in terms of faith. But do you notice something interesting in her background? Allama Iqbal, yes. So Allama Iqbal is the national hero of Pakistan. And he's also a Muslim philosopher and thinker and poet. But you have Toxi Kawasji here, who's Parsi. She's got Allama Iqbal's picture. What else has she got? Yes, she's got a Christmas tree. So she celebrates her Christmas every year. And in the book, you'll see some lovely cookies she made for me. So that's something really special. These are the Jews of Pakistan. These are the Messianic Jews. But we also went to Karachi and saw many graveyards and gravestones with Hebrew. And so that was really interesting. I found out that there was a mayor of Karachi who was Jewish, Rabbi Shaheen, the lady, and Rabbi Aftab. These are Pakistani Buddhists. So you have Buddhists in interior Sindh, and some of them are really very poor. So when we're, you know, really talking, or from this perspective, sitting here in the West or in America or maybe the UK or other countries and looking at those countries far away, We can't see them as one block, but there's so much diversity there. And they have so many challenges. For example, this gentleman was telling me about his poverty, and there are about 200 families, and the challenges that he was describing are described in the book. These are the Baha'is in Karachi. You see a young Sikh boy. This is Panja Sahib. This is back in Karachi at St. Patrick's Cathedral. These are Pakistani Hindu women. And this is an interesting picture because you have Hindu women standing in front of a Muslim mazar. So you won't normally associate that. But there's a lot of flow, although this book is divided chapter-wise into different religions, but in reality, you know, there are people who marry, or there are people who have sort of financial relations, and they're constant flow. There's a flow of living together side by side. So these were the stories I was referring to, that these are Shah Abdul Latif Bhitai is one scholar, saint, poet. He really talks about many stories. There are about 7 stories he talks about in his book, the Shah Jo Risalo. And that's really, really a treasure. And he's known as the Shakespeare of South Asia, or the Shakespeare of Sindh or Pakistan. And it's even said that Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet is inspired by Ganjavi's Laila Majnu. And all these stories, his story, Shah Abdul Latif, along with Waris Shah's Heer Ranja, and you'll find many other stories, again, a symbol of divine love. So these are all metaphors. These are all at a very sophisticated, at a level where it's not literal. So for the people on the streets, you're translating the Abrahamic concepts of inclusiveness, compassion, and really getting down to the street and saying, look, here, this means this. Soni the girl, the protagonist, means that she is the symbol for the believer, whereas Mahiwal, who's the boy, is the symbol for the prophet. And the dangerous river is a symbol for life with all its challenges, and the crocodiles and the snakes in the river. And then one night, while Soni is going to visit Mahiwal, her sister-in-law and the mother-in-law, because Soni is married to someone else by force, by her father. So to challenge her, the sister-in-law changes the pot, the clay pot. And instead of the cooked clay pot, she puts a uncooked, unbaked pot. So that night when Soni is crossing the river, the pot melts because it's an especially stormy night. And each animal is a symbol again for something. So Shah Abdul Latif Bhitai says in his book, he says, don't take my verses lightly. These are not just stories. They are actually verses of the Quran. So it's something, you know, sort of very interesting, the concepts, which I thought was fascinating and something for us to maybe teach and learn at schools, at universities. So some of the things that I learned was that I was really in this book, while traveling from one end of Pakistan, I was really challenged by my own stereotypes, which reflected the wider stereotypes that people held. For example, people said, oh, Parsis are fire worshippers, or Buddhists are statue worshippers, but none of that was true. So when I went down to the ground and interviewed Parsis, they said the fire is a symbol for the fire of, or the light of life, or the symbol of God, the light of God. Or the Buddhists, the Buddha never said to make statues of himself. So it's really our own ignorance, and especially mine as a scholar, as someone who's a learner in a position of humility, to be able to learn, to sit at the feet of these wonderful people. They may be very poor, but they may be, you know, they have such wonderful ideas and stories and perspectives, and to really learn from them and to bring those stories to you all so that you all can read about them. So really it's about translating those ideas, people's voices from the field, and putting them into practice. How do we do that? I've taught peace studies as a result. Some of this work has been excellent fieldwork material. We're also setting up a center called Markaz-e-Ilm. So there's a lot of connections that one can make in terms of fieldwork, knowledge, how do you connect with the people on the ground? And a lot of these students are very inspired. For example, on one occasion, I was asked to give a talk on women and minorities. And instead of giving long lectures, and I know this may be a little leaning towards a long lecture, what I did was I asked some of my students to act out one of the plays from the Shahjo Risalo. So that came along very well because the students loved, you know, the whole idea of drama and they went away with the same concepts. So finally, I want to thank the Yunus Emre Center and also be on time and love to engage with you and learn from you because now it's your turn to ask questions. And I'd love to hear what you have to say. So thank you so much. Thank you, Shehrabano. Thank you, Dr. Mehmet. And thank you all.
So Dr. Amineh Hoti, having a social anthropology background and devoting heartfelt and extensive research on the interfaith work, interreligious studies, it was, I mean, you are the specialist and expert in the field. I have a little background in working interfaith sector within the UK, I will say, and I can tell how much work and effort is put in terms of building dialogue and promoting the harmony between different people of faith and the communities. And thank you very much for this inspiring talk and introducing us the actual and natural harmony people of Pakistan have there, and which is an untold story for us. It was truly inspiring, and was delighted to hear from you. Now, I would like to encourage our audience to ask their questions to Dr. Amineh Hoti. I will just kindly mention that be mindful and, if possible, keep your questions a little short because iftar time is also approaching, and you might be aware that we will be offering iftar after the talk. Please join us. Do we have?
Could you introduce yourself? Maybe stand up, introduce yourself, and ask the question, please.
One question that keeps coming up in especially in dialogue and work. Obviously, in my own conversations with Ahmadiyya, they always say they're Muslims. But officially, in Pakistan, I understand by law, they're not classed as Muslims. And obviously, but they are part of the Pakistani religious fabric. So I just wanted you to enlighten us on what the issues are and what is your opinion and how this matter can be, because I understand when Pakistan was created, actually, there were many Ahmadiyya who were part of the Pakistan struggle and the movement. They were important figures in the formation of Pakistan. And then somewhere along the line, they became cast out. And I don't know what the solution is. Thank you.
Brother, thank you so much for your important question. And thank you for the work you do. It's really good, and for bringing it to all of us. You've asked a very important question. And I do feel a lot of pain and difficulty when I think of those issues and what you've raised, especially for the community. It's something that needs more research and focus. I have not looked at this area yet, but I would love to be more aware and do more research, because I've been in this book, I focused on the 10 religious communities in a very general introductory way, so that we begin to talk about diversity. So because we haven't gone to that stage where we even accept ourselves, let alone 10 other faiths. And so I think it's a very important point, and I think inclusiveness is part of every faith community, as you saw. Alif?
Thank you so much, Dr. Amineh. I'm Dr. Elif, Turkish background, and also friend of Dr. Amineh. We have Sufi group. My will be about Sufism. But first of all, thank you so much for highlighting Allame Iqbal, because Allame Iqbal, he's the founder of your nation, and it reminds me mainly our spiritual leader also, and also our Turkish, one of the most important Turkish poets, Mehmet Akif Ersoy. He is the writer of our national anthem. And my question is, what is the, actually, I want to ask a direct question, but I just want to make it a little bit ornament and special things, you know. I just want to serve with good sentences. What is the place of Sufism in Pakistan? Especially, for example, when you go to Bosnia, you see a lot of Sufism, like Sarı Saltuk and any other Sufi dervishes. So I want to dig in more a little bit. And did you mention anything about Sufism in your book? Maybe you can give some information. I know it takes a lot of time to explain this, but maybe two, three sentences.
Yes.
Thank you.
In just a few sentences, Alif, the book, especially the Muslim section, if you see Data Sahib, if you see Shah Abdul Latif Bhai, Waris Shah, Bulle Shah, they're all Sufis. But what I've also said is that there is a diversity of voices in Pakistan, and there needs to be much more understanding. So sometimes those books are not read in schools, and sometimes in schools the curriculum could be a bit hardline. So there does need to be much more awareness of these very rich texts. And the more we explore them, the better for our students, because sometimes our students are so inspired. You know, they've heard about Soni Mahiwal, Sasi Panu. These are just love stories, as in Bollywood, romanticized and all, but they don't know about the spiritual depth. And that's what we need to explore. So more work does need to be done, and this book does reflect that voice and that perspective. I think Roger.
How did you manage to communicate with all these different groups like the Kalash? Did they speak Urdu? How did you manage to speak with all these, communicate?
That's a really good question. So how did I manage to communicate with, for example, the Kalash? The Kalash have their own language, but they also speak Urdu. So a lot of the people did speak Urdu. I mean, you know, all these communities have their own language, and they're not just bilingual, they're trilingual, and they speak so many languages. But Urdu is a language that many of them speak. So I think that was easier for me, and in English, both. Yes, there's a lady over there. Yes, that's a good question. For that, you really have to look in the book. Answers right there. But what happens, and what's your name again? Sorry? The question was, what is the meaning of the word Kalash? So the Kalash believe that there are descendants of Alexander the Great who passed by that region with his army. And there was a general called Shalak Shah. So they reverse that word, Shalak Kalash. That's one theory, but they have different theories as to their origin. And again, it's all discussed. So, but that's a good question. Thank you. Let's take a question from here.
Changing Kafiristan into Nuristan. That the next group demolishes a mosque. Where would you, how do you feel about the communal violences?
I feel awful about it. And I feel, as I said in my talk, that every faith talks about unity, inclusiveness in the ideal, in the theory. But down on the ground, human beings fail to live up to those ideals and those principles. So often there's hatred, there's otherizing. And as I said, the Kalasha are called kafir. They don't appreciate that because they don't see themselves as kafir. Because the word, as soon as you say kafir, it otherizes the other person.
They dilute that notion.
Yes, yes. But that's, again, it's something for us to hear their voice. What are they saying? Let's listen. My work is about listening with respect. So we listen to their perspective. And Millat Gul Bibi, who's not the chairman of the Kalasha, but she's a very senior lady. She just won the elections. So she talks about her whole story and about her beliefs and belief system and all. And for me, it was really interesting because there's so many things I didn't know.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Emily. That was incredible. I was wondering, it was very interesting how you were saying you were dividing the book by religion. I was wondering if there were any common themes that you could divide the book otherwise by, in which would unite religions. Thank you.
Now, I knew a Cambridge graduate in law would ask a very difficult question. Thank you, Victoria. So yes, that's a very good question. And if I had a choice, or if I could work it out differently, there would be themes, because there'd be themes of maybe education, how they feel about education, and how there's a difference between the practice or the laws, where we all talk about we're all inclusive and compassionate, etc. But in reality, there is so much pain. For example, this lady who is Farishta, she's now living in Canada, but she used to be from Karachi. So she misses the soil and smell and the rain of Karachi, but she talks about the inclusiveness of Canada. And so she feels conflicted. So, there's that ideal reality, there's knowledge, where does education come in? There's a sense of the challenges, where there's friendships. There could be different themes, and that is a very interesting way too to look at the book. So thank you, Victoria.
Thank you very much again, Dr. Amineh Hoti, and thank you all for joining us today. I would like to welcome you for a warm conversation and book signing with Dr. Amineh Hoti, and soon we will have iftar. We have prayer facility set up in the second floor, and my colleagues and myself will be assisting you around iftar time. It will be on the ground floor. Thank you very much again for joining us. And if you would like to be informed about our upcoming events, please follow us on social media. On all platforms, you could find us as YEE Londra, Londra. Thank you.